So I was first introduced to this idea of conscious spending from Ramit Sethi in his book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And this concept really helped me and Hannah get on the same page with our money. Here's what it boils down to. You need to consciously think about the stuff that matters to you and what doesn't, and then spend extravagantly on the things that really matter to you and cut ruthlessly on everything else.
So one of the big areas where this came into play in our life was with pets. So as soon as I realized that cutting down on what I spend at TJ Maxx or at the grocery store or whatever could actually help contribute to us getting a dog, that made budgeting a whole lot more interesting to me. So every time I was out buying something, I would run through that mental exercise of going, okay, well, do I want another top from TJ Maxx, or would I rather this money go towards a dog and some of our future dog expenses? And almost always the answer was to go towards the future dog.
The biggest problem is that we as humans, like 40 to 50% of our daily decisions are based out of habit. They're based on previous decisions. So whether you're going out to eat at work, picking something from the grocery store up on the way from home, getting gas and getting your favorite snack, all that stuff we do unconsciously out of habit. And when you're spending $5 here, $10 there, $20 here, that stuff adds up. This is not about cutting out the Starbucks latte like you hear so many personal finance gurus say. This is about cutting out the Starbucks latte if you're not consciously buying it.
So Nick was talking about this concept a few months ago at a live workshop, and he kind of used the example of how we like to save up our money and buy more expensive bags and shoes, but we're willing to cut ruthlessly on staying in hotels, going out to eat, and clothing compared to most people. And a woman raised her hand and she said, well, that's all great, but I want the shoes, the bag, the hotel, and the clothes, and to go out to eat. I think everybody can relate to that. Like, yeah, on the surface, we do want all those things. But if you take the time to dive into it, I think you'll find that your values actually aren't reflected in all of those items. So we're kind of going to work through that mindset and use these 4 steps to help get past that initial gut reaction of, yeah, but I want it all. Step number 1 is to commit to tracking your expenses for at least a month. Before you figure out where you should be spending your money and where you should be cutting back, you have to know what you're doing currently. If you skip this step, it's like trying to go somewhere using your GPS, but refusing to tell your phone where you're starting out from. It's not going to get you where you want to go. So this is a really important step before you can do anything else in your finances.
What I've found over and over again is that most people can't even tell you exactly how much money they spend on groceries or eating out in any given month. So I challenge you to take step number 1, track your stuff for a month, and at least see what is currently happening. So that brings us to step number 2, which is to take that month's worth of spending that you now have and really analyze what's the underlying values behind those purchases that you're actually buying. Are you spending money to support your family, maybe your kids or extended family members or your spouse? Are you spending money on your home situation because maybe that really matters to you? Where's the bulk of your money going? And we're not just talking about like the grocery store or the restaurant or the clothing store. We're talking about the underlying value. Are you going out to eat to save time and be more efficient? Are you going out to eat because you love food? Or are you going out to eat for social time? All 3 of those things look the same in your budget, but the underlying value is a different purchase.
So once you do your tracking and you figure out what values you're spending money on, you're going to want to analyze and see if those values that you're paying for actually align with your top priorities. If you're having trouble figuring out if your spending reflects your values, here's a couple of questions that might be helpful. What 2 or 3 categories have I spent the most money on? Is there anything that makes me cringe when I see how much I've spent on it? And what do I feel confident about spending my money on? In other words, what am I super glad that my money went towards?
Like us, we average $300 to $400 a month for pet expenses. We have never cringed when we look at that category. We look at the category and we go, yep, you know what?
They're worth it.
They're worth it. I feel really good about that spending.
So once you figure out where you're spending your money and what your actual values are, then you can think about whether there's a more cost-effective way to achieve those values. For us, this came into play with restaurants. We were spending a lot of money every month to go out to eat. And when we sat down and thought about the values that we really appreciated from eating out, it was more of the social aspect and getting a change of scenery from the Airstream. So we decided that we could achieve that same value by just going to a coffee shop and getting a drip coffee for a couple of bucks.
So that helps us in 2 ways. We can spend the exact same amount of money that we were spending eating out and just go out a lot more because now it's only costing us $4 to maybe $8 if we get really fancy coffees. Or we can just go out the same amount of times and then use the money somewhere else that is more important, like a long-term trip or maybe a retirement fund, because we want to be well prepared. This is how we start shifting some of those dollars we're using on a monthly basis into some bigger values that have a longer payoff. But the restaurant example is just a small one. This is really, really important for the big purchases in your life, like the college you choose, the career path you go down, the house, the cars you buy, the houses that you live in, and the cities that you choose to live in. When you look at the values that those specific cities or houses or cars bring you, get super clear on which 1, 2, or 3 things matter the most, and then try to look at alternatives that are cheaper but still give you those top 3 things.
So if you live in San Diego because your whole family lives in San Diego and family is really important to you, then location is probably not going to be the area where you want to cut back on your expenses. So you're going to have to do other things like, driving an older car, choosing a smaller house, or renting, other areas where you can cut back and still achieve your primary goal of being close to family.
All right, so all that brings us to step number 4, which is to make the transition from tracking your money to actually budgeting your money ahead of time, making this conscious decision before you ever get there.
So this is a big step because you're going from passively spending your money and looking back to see where it went to proactively deciding where your money's going to go.
The cool part about this is that if you underspend in a certain area, you get to reward yourself by then shifting that excess leftover money to one of your top priorities, like that big maybe Ireland trip that you really want to go to. That's something that Hannah and I really want to do. And keep in mind, to kind of put a bow on this whole conversation, this is not about restriction. It's not about being frugal and telling you what you cannot do. I worked with a guy a couple of months ago who one of his top things that he loved doing was going to Chick-fil-A. And not just like once a week. I'm talking 25 to 30 times per month. So you know what? We talked about his budget, we looked at everything, and we made that work.
And he was okay with the fact that that meant he had to cut down in other areas to be able to do that.
It was all about conscious spending and saying, you know what? This matters to me, and I'm willing to spend it to get it.
That's 4 steps to help you maximize the value that you're getting from your money, regardless of what your income level is.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're working with $4,000 a month or $400,000 a month. Everything has its limits, and we want to use as much of that money as possible to get your top values.